explained previously to our knowledge. And we've known it for hundreds of years. So this is due to the fact that everything resides on the surface of an equator of a ring. Now, do we have any evidence of that? Well, we do. We have some very interesting evidence. This is a picture that NASA took. This is a mock-up of Jupiter in the middle. They've added that. But this is the orbit that they have plotted out of Io, which is a moon of Jupiter. And Io is unique among moons in that it's volcanic, and it puts out an ash. And that ash forms a cloud around its orbit around Jupiter. And it turns out that the orbit of the planet is on the surface of this uniform ring, a toroidal ring of ash. And so we can see that its path is on the surface of a ring, toroidal ring. The only visual evidence of that sort that I know of. NASA picture. Here's another NASA picture. This is very interesting. This is the orbits of Jupiter's moon about the orbit of Jupiter. This is the motion, this is the path of Jupiter going around the sun. These are the orbits of all the four of its moons. And notice the spiraling effect. Can you see that? This is NASA data, their plot, not mine, their picture, not mine. And so if you can imagine, this is a big circular orbit around the sun, and these things are just all spiraling around as they go around. This is even more amazing when you see the same structure in molecules, organic molecules, and many other things. But anyway, that is the structure. And also, there is BoS Law going on. I don't know if you can see it here, but distance between these dark spots is a unit of time for periods. Notice that some of them have a period where it goes just between two spots, from a maximum to a minimum. Some of them do 4. Some of them do 2. And you can see that the ratio of the periods of the planets are integer multiples, of the moons are integer multiples of one another, which is a form of BoS Law about the planet Jupiter. Here is, this is a picture of an elementary particle from our theory of elementary particles. There are 3 charged fibers that go around on the surface of a toroidal ring. Here is a ring galaxy. If you look closely, you can see the 3 fibers exactly as in an elementary particle. It's all determined by the same force law. It doesn't depend on scale. So whether it's an elementary particle, or it's an atom, or it's a molecule, or it's a solar system, or it's a galaxy, they all have the same structure. Let me show you some better pictures. This is a side view of one. Can you see the fibers here? This is one that is forming or decaying, one or the other. You can see the real fibers of a galaxy on some of those. Here is one from the top, looking down. You can see the spiral arms. What causes these to spiral? That term in the force of gravity, R cross V term, causes these structures. The current theories of gravity cannot explain these spiral arms. They need more mass, they need dark matter, they need all kinds of explanation. A very simple explanation for the structure of these bodies. Here is a spiral galaxy showing secondary spirals, the secondary fibers as we call them, and this last one shows primary, secondary, and tertiary. So we see the same structures on the largest scale in the universe that we see inside of an elementary particle. And so we're very encouraged by that. And it's because the force of gravity has the same structure as the electrodynamic force, and same structure as the inertial force. I'm not going to go over the inertial force today, but we have some very interesting data there. Now this is a boat, a picture of a boat, and here's his law. Basically, if you look at this relationship, the period of any planet numbered n is equal to some p naught times a, which is the semi-major axis of the orbit, to the nth power. And so if you plot that to see how it fits, here's the Sun, here's Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, asteroid belt, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus. That should be a U. This must be a German person. Neptune and Pluto. So anyway, you see how they're not perfect, but they're very linear. Very linear. That's been known for a long time. In fact, the positions of many of the planets, including the latest planets that were discovered and then declared non-planets, that's how they were discovered from BoS Law. Here's a picture of what we mean by the planets. You see that there's integer relationships between the radii and the periods of the different planets. Here is now the planet Uranus. It has these 5 moons. The moons also satisfy BoS Law, and even the value for the planet falls on the same line. So, and that's true not only for Uranus, but for Jupiter and for Saturn and its moons. And here is a picture that shows the agreement with BoS Law for the planets, then for the moons about Jupiter, the moons about Saturn, the moons about Uranus, the moons about Neptune. And you can see the agreement is remarkable, considering that it's considered a fluke in most astronomy books, and there's no explanation for it. Now, not only do we see that in our solar system, but a man named Tift looked out and he was measuring the redshifts. Now, we saw that the redshifts increase with distance. Well, not only did he see that Hubble saw, but he saw that there were bands between the redshifts. And so if we're measuring the redshift, and this is an idealized picture here, if we're measuring the redshift, we have a redshift, then we have hardly anything, then we have some more redshifts, and then hardly anything, then more redshifts, then more redshifts, and that sort of thing. So he saw this, he called this the periodicity in the redshifts. And this periodicity was very regular, had a value of 0.000024 in his first measurements. And then people found that, the periodicity could be improved. If you're 2 million light years from the center of the universe, which is where we believe we are from the cosmic background radiation, we have a way of determining the center of the universe from the cosmic background radiation, then we could correct the raw data and calculate it as if it had been observed from the center of the universe. And when we do that, it is extremely regular, and we see more periodicities than we can see from any other form of analysis. Remember, this is number of galaxies with certain number of redshifts that he observed. Then Tift went on and he found, to his dismay, that the magnitude of all redshifts, even the quantized ones, is decaying rather rapidly over time. And the decay is too fast for a velocity Doppler shift origin. There's no mechanism to slow the movement of stars and galaxies enough to change the redshift this fast. And so there was no explanation for this. In fact, when he published this, he didn't even put his name on it. He published it anonymously because he had a hard time the first time when he had quantized decays. No one believed him for 20 years. And finally, he got recognition for that. but he felt like he would never get recognition for this. So he published it anonymously, but people knew who did it. So anyway, that wasn't explained before. So our conclusions then about gravity. Gravity is due to the force between vibrating neutral electric dipoles consisting primarily of protons and electrons. There's a non-radial gravitational force term. Planets have an orbit on the surface of a toroidal ring centered on an equatorial plane of the sun. See, our theory, like Einstein's general theory of relativity and Newton's universal gravitational theory, is supposed to have all orbits centered on the equatorial plane of the sun. Ours does. They don't. So we're the first, because we have it, our ring is centered on the equatorial plane of the sun. So we have the first one that meets that criteria, which everyone expects to be true. We find that mass is not a fundamental quantity. In fact, when Kepler first put out his laws, there was no mass in them. But he could explain the orbits of all the planets about the sun. And NASA uses Kepler's laws for calculating the orbits for all their space shots because it's easier. And it doesn't involve mass at all. So if he could do it without mass at all, what is mass? Well, mass is something that Newton defined. And it turns out it's not a fundamental quantity, but it looks like it from its laws. And we just assumed it was. And G, the universal gravitation constant, is not a fundamental constant either. The cosmic background radiation comes from the vibrating neutral electric dipoles radiating, and they have to radiate continuously. And you realize the whole universe is running down. It started out with more oscillations, and it's slowly running down. It was better in the past, and it's losing energy. It follows this decay that produces gravity is the origin of the second law of thermodynamics, the electrodynamic origin. Hubble's redshifts were produced by stronger gravitational forces in the past that we see when we look at stars and objects that we're receiving light from the past. The redshifts decay over time just due to the decay of all of these vibrating dipoles, and this also agrees with the second law of thermodynamics. Second law of thermodynamics is enforced by the laws of electrodynamics and should have no exceptions anywhere in the universe. The quantization of the orbital radii, BoS Law, and the axial spin are electrodynamic in origin. So we see that we can explain quantization effects, which no previous theory of gravity could do. We can explain BoS Law, and we explain all these phenomena with one theory. So what are the advantages then of this approach? First of all, it's the only gravitational theory derived from a universal force law. That gives it an advantage of simplicity. It is based on real finite-sized particles. The Einstein's general theory of relativity, which was considered the second best theory of gravity, is based on point particles. It has no known approximations in it. It satisfies Mach's principle. Einstein's general theory of relativity and his special theory of relativity do not satisfy Mach's principle. It was a goal of Einstein. He never achieved it. It's a contact force, as expected by natural philosophers for thousands of years. It describes curling, spiraling motion of astronomical bodies, as observed. It predicts a new non-radial term, which, as the data confirms, actually this is redundant with that. It predicts the force of gravity decaying over time, and all kinds of data confirm that, from the cosmic background radiation to the decay of redshifts to whatever. It explains the cosmic background radiation. It explains Hubble's redshift law as a function of distance. He explains TIFF's quantized redshifts. He explains TIFF's decay of redshifts over time. He explains more phenomena than all previous gravity force theories put together. It eliminates mass as a fundamental quantity. It eliminates G as a fundamental constant, and it explains the origin of BoS Law and the origin of all gravitational quantization in terms of angles, radii, etc. So, this work, we believe, which is a major reformation in science, is going to put creation on track for being fully compatible with the Scripture. And I tried to show earlier how, you know, we can explain from day one what happened. How the Earth's cooled due to rapid expansion, and we got the water and the Earth, and then how it slowly stretched over time, producing the flood, and then the receding of the waters, and then the division of the continents later. And it's still expanding, and we can still measure it. It's not expanding as fast as those days, but still expanding. All the other objects in the solar system are expanding, and we can see the evidence of that just from pictures. We have the GPS data showing that the Earth is expanding, and we can see the different distances between the continents on the surface of the Earth. So we have all this phenomena, and we should press this and get the secular scientific community to acknowledge that this is better than any previous theory of gravity ever published. And that will give us a heads up, because now they won't have, the evolutionary forces will not have the leading force of gravity. They'll have to make their geological models conform to the Universal Force Law. And they'll end up with something that agrees with the Scripture, where it says that God expanded the surface of the Earth, and He expanded the stars and things like a curtain in space. And we will be able to show that the Scripture is fully reliable in scientific descriptions, and it was actually the key that helped us find the correct science. Just like people in the past have used the Scripture, like I think Andrew Murray found the paths of the water in the ocean from reading the Scripture, and he went and looked for it, and sure enough, there were paths there. And okay, well anyway, so anyway, these are the things. This is the end of my presentation, and I'll be glad to entertain questions. Yes, sir.
Two of the landmark observations that were used to provide support for general relativity were, number one, the precession of the perihelion of Mercury's orbit,
Right.
and number two, the bending of light rays that was observed at a total eclipse around the sun. Does your theory explain those two observations?
First of all, NASA has done an experiment which has been published, and they have found what is believed to be a black hole in space, and stars are going around this black hole with a tremendous gravitational field, such that they make an orbit, a large orbit, in the period of less than a year. So they have photographed its position, and they have shown that the strength of the force of gravity is many orders of magnitude larger than the experiment that was done, a grazing experiment on the sun, and there is absolutely no effect. And so therefore, the interpretation has been that the experiment done in 1918, 19, where it was measuring a diffraction of the light through the sun, the atmosphere of the sun, and they noticed when they repeated the experiment that if you move off of the edge of the sun just a small bit, you should still have an effect, but you don't measure it. So that has been disproven.
It's been observed from stars with galaxies with a light source behind them.
Well, I'm just saying that the motion of galaxies in space has been used by NASA. There is a website that shows that, and
So you don't think that gravity can bend light?
well, in our approach, there's only one force, that's electrodynamic. Can the electrodynamic force affect light? Yes, it can. Okay, so gravity, as we were looking at it, we only identified one term in the force law, which has many terms. We only looked at the effect of one term. And so there are other terms. So can you have bending of starlight? Well, you could under certain circumstances. And so we don't throw that out. But what I'm trying to say is that NASA has discredited that experiment. And it's a major experiment that they did. As far as the rate of precession perihelion of Mercury, in the Creation Research Society meetings and in the International Creation Conference have been published classical explanations for the rate of precession that doesn't involve general relativity at all. So it's not clear that there's any effect there that needs explaining, because it looks like there are classical explanations. The students under Tom Barnes did that work, and you can see it published in the Creation Research Society Quarterly, and also in, as I say, the proceedings of the International Creation Conference. I've read those. I don't have any particular opinion. We have not tried to calculate effects of that order of magnitude. You know, that's a small effect, the rate of precession of the perihelion. And so in our work that we've done, we haven't gotten down to that effect. So I can't really say what we would say about it. We would probably be able to say something eventually, but we don't have the manpower to do everything we like to do. I mean, you know, I'm working in 8 different fields simultaneously, and I can only work, and I have a full-time job, and I run a company besides, so I don't have a family. So, you know, there's a limit to how much you can do. Other questions? Yes, sir.
Based on the rate of rotation, slowing down, and the spiral effect, can you predict or quantify how many rotations, how many cycles it would take before everything stops?
You might. I haven't thought about it. You can say something about the rate of rotation that would have been in the past. If the Earth is, let's say, 6,000 years old, and we know the rate of decay, so supposedly we work it backwards, can we learn anything about it? Well, what we learn is that the rate of rotation is still compatible with the bulge that we see at the equator. Okay, but if the Earth was millions of years old and it was decaying like this, then the Earth would have flown apart at the equator because it's rotating too fast. So you can make statements like that. In terms of slowing down, you know, the last little bit of slowing down takes forever to occur. So I don't know what significance attached to that, but you could try to calculate it. Yes, sir.
Can you actually measure the rotational speed of the Earth and see it slowing?
Yes, you can. I was at University of Maryland in graduate school. We had a ring laser experiment in the lab next to where I worked, and I actually observed them measuring that, and they measured the rate of rotation throughout the year, and it wasn't smooth. It had blips in it, and they were trying to explain that, but it did decay slowly, and they could measure it to parts per million, so it was a pretty accurate measurement. They could see the decline from year to year. But of course it's parts per million, so it's not a big effect that's obvious to everyone.
So we're not going to be changing our calendars to take a day out.
Yeah, but eventually it'll make an effect, and so it could be that in the past they knew the calendar better, but the Earth's slowing down, and so now we had to correct it with leap years and stuff like that, which we didn't need to do in the past. Yes?
If the Earth is billions of years old, as some of these people claim, and the Earth is slowing down at the rate that you described, we'd be stopped already, wouldn't we?
Well, you have to work it backwards. If it's slowing down, if it was faster in the past by the same rate, it's slowing down, say give it an exponential decay or some kind of decay rate, then in the past it would have rotated, if it had been there a million years, it would have rotated so fast that it would have come apart. Because it can only rotate up to a certain speed before it flies apart. The force of gravity is not strong enough to hold it together. And so you can do that kind of limit on your model. Were you here for the first talk? Were you here for the first talk I gave? Yeah, well, so we don't think it's really millions of years old.
Well, I think that I understand. I have other reasons for not thinking it's millions of years old. So would the Van Allen asteroid belt, would that have been a planet at one time? Because if you're saying that if it's millions of years old, things would be spinning so fast it would blow apart, then there's claim that the moon came from the Earth, but you don't see any of those asteroids being around. So that wouldn't be it.
Well, you can say that according to BoS Law, the asteroid belt is at the position that would have been a planet. So we know that. So that we suspect that it might have been a body at one time. We don't know why it came apart. And so I don't think anybody knows that. But it does look like it was a planet at one time. And some of the larger asteroids fit in very well with BoS Law, even better than the asteroid belt in general. So some of them the bigger ones seem to have a better value of a radius and everything, period.
A couple more questions.
Yes, sir.
On the BoS Law thing, predicting where our planets are going to be, presumably in their distance from the sun, does that indicate that there is some sort of a instability for any planet that would be at an interim position between where BoS Law is predicting? Like if God accidentally stuck a planet between Earth and Venus, that it would eventually work its way toward either the Venus or the Earth orbit? Is that what that's saying?
I think so. I think that second term in the gravitational force, the spiraling term, it wants to have the spiral be an integer number for stability. And so I think it's a self-correcting thing. I think if we were to put our satellites up, which we put up at any old radius, if we were to leave them up there long enough without atmosphere affecting them, I suspect they would end up in something like a BoS Law orbit. And so you might not have started there, but you seem to end up there eventually. And so it's hard to say because we're looking at it, after the fact. But it could be that it didn't start out in that orbit exactly, but it ended up there due to the expansion and decay and that sort of thing of the force of gravity. Yes. Yes, sir.
In the first talk, you mentioning some explanations for the decay rate of various elements and why they appear to be older than they might,
Right.
than they should. That kind of dovetails with some of the things that ICR is looking into with their rate project and whatnot. Do you have any comments on how that fits together, and do you have any coordination or conversation with anyone?
Well, their goal, of course, is to show that the Earth is young. And I think the ICR should have picked up more on the radio halo data because that is the absolute best data there is for this type of argument. It shows that you've made an error in your nuclear decay measurement, age measurement process, and you need to correct it. And so, it completely nullifies the results that gave an old age. And so I think that's the strongest argument. They, for some reason, chose not to do that. And my opinion is they didn't like the original